It's not like you can only write what you know. I've written about characters who are cannibals in my horror stuff, and I'm not a cannibal, and I would never be a cannibal, we hope. You know what I mean? It's my best guess as to what would kind of push someone to that. But it's just like I found the stuff that's going on in your life works its way into your writing, whether you kind of want it to or not. The more of your life you've lived, the more interesting stuff you can kind of work in there.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Tradecraft podcast. I'm Alex. I try not to be too precious about the creative process, in so much as it's like, oh, will the muses speak to me today kind of thing. Process has been something that's been super important to me, even probably before I even knew really what it was. And it's gotten me out of a lot of tight jams. I also think the act, when you're doing it and when it's working, is like this magic spell. And then there are certain things which are like the, mixing my metaphors here, like kryptonite to this magic. For me, it's problematic individuals, and they don't have to be involved with whatever I'm working on. It could be another thing. Today, the inevitable, it wasn't even an email, it was a text from another client, and it was a series of texts, and they were just getting more and more, I don't even really know what you're talking about kind of stuff, to a point where I said, hey, let's get on a call. Got on a call. I just looked at my other work and said, well, see you later. I don't know how it works for you, but man, it just, sometimes when you just, I don't know, hey, another metaphor here. It's like Buster Douglas, you're Mike Tyson and you're just knocking everything out. But then this unknown cat comes along and just has your number. Anyway, this week's guest is Rich Douek. Rich is a one of one as guests go. I've had people say, hey, you should have so-and-so on the show. Those are usually recommendations from other guests and friends. And I try to accommodate. Still waiting for Alan Moore to email me back one day. A couple of months ago, somebody on Twitter @messaged me and said, you should have Rich on. And someone just, put two and two together, said, if I say to the person whose podcast I listen to, I want them on there, maybe that'll happen. And it did. I was, I realized that's A+ to you. And Rich has a parallel background in that he has been in the advertising business for, 20-ish years. I was super curious to see how someone who lives in that world lives in the comic book world and how they integrate both disciplines. I also like seeing people navigate their way into the industry from a different perspective. Rich didn't go in, I'm going to go work for Marvel or DC. He really had a very smart approach to how he wanted to engage with the business, and he seems to be handling it the way he likes, and I think that's fantastic. Yeah, so this is me with the Rich Douek. 2 back-to-back trips. We went to Colorado, and then we went out to Oregon. And I wrote consistently on the Colorado trip. But when we got to Oregon, my wife is like, can you just not write? Can you just hang out? And I'm like,
yeah.
All right. I'll take a 0. Do you struggle with any sort of ego with any of the work?
I don't know. I mean, I think I used to be a lot more like, gotta write every day, mm-hmm. But then I just sort of got to the point where I felt like it was doing more harm to me, like mentally, mm-hmm. than good. Like, where it was like I was beating myself up about not hitting a target more than I was like having the target be like a positive thing. Yeah. Or yeah. So for me, I think eventually I was just like, okay, well, I just need to like it's less about a target of like words or pages or something like that, and more just like I have to like put the time in, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
So if it's going to be like an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours or whatever it is, it's like, you know, butt in chair for that amount of time.
Hmm.
And if we get, 1,000 words out, great. If I get 300 words out,
Great,
not great,
but
but
great.
like, okay, yeah,
Hmm.
great. And just to like, just sort of accept that it's like, doesn't really matter how smooth I would like the process to be
Yeah,
if, my brain is not agreeing with that.
yeah,
And, you know,
yeah. It's tough. It's tough because having been on both sides of the it just in the comic book world on both sides of that fence, you know, the hours are brutally long when you're penciling. It's just there's no way
hmm
around it. It's not an easy an easy racket, but there's a roadmap. You're looking at a
yeah,
script,
yeah,
and if you are hired to do the job, you have the tools available to do it. And while you start a day off with a blank piece of paper, it's not a blank piece of paper in a sort of existential sense. It is a
right.
piece that you just have to execute a complex series of actions to make it come together. And then the times when you're just getting frustrated with yourself as a writer, and I'm not talking writer's block because I don't kind of believe in that kind of stuff. I think if you do the work, you put yourself in the place and you do the stuff, it happens. It's a performance thing. If you don't level up to the performance that you feel that you are or you've
hmm
reached it, I think right now I'm just battling this sort of internal clock that only I set. Nobody's put this external sort of thing saying, "Hey, we need this by this date. Do it."
Yeah. I was going to say, I think like deadlines actually really help
Oh yeah,
more
yeah.
than hinder when it comes to like, when it comes to writer's block and stuff. It's like, there's kind of like no such thing as writer's block when you have to hand in the script like that day and it's not done or
Hmm.
like whatever. It's
Hmm.
like you have to get it done, barring like emergencies or whatever. But yeah, I think deadlines really help to like kind of, sort of help everything kind of click into place like mentally to like, get you in the place where like you're going to write. Um, and like, I think like when I don't have a deadline, that's when like, yeah, it can like, because you could find like a million excuses like not to write, you know
Hmm.
what I mean? Like whether it's like other things you have to do or I don't know, oh, maybe I'll just watch TV or like whatever, you know what I mean?
Totally.
Or things like that. It's like, there's like a million things. And then like, and like, I don't really believe in writer's block either. I think it's like, I think when people talk about writer's block, they're more talking about like, um, they're sort of like getting stuck with something.
Hmm.
And then it's like, and there's like certain things where like, no matter how hard you push, you're not going to like unstick it.
Yeah.
So what you really need to do is kind of like take a step back and, go look at why you're having that problem
Hmm.
as opposed to like trying to solve it directly. Um, so like, for example, if it's like, like I don't know what to do with this scene.
Hmm.
I don't know, um, I don't know what the character is supposed to say. It's like rather than being like paralyzed by like that choice, it's like you kind of have to go back and be like, okay, well, why? How did I get myself into the position
Hmm.
of being where like I don't know what to do in the scene or I don't know what this character
Yeah.
is supposed to say? What am I missing about this character? And then I think like once you kind of like get to the foundation underneath it, like you know, then you just it's like you sort of when you fix like the real problem, then you're able to kind of go forward.
No, no, I think you're right. I think it's a matter of the problem that sometimes we face on the page isn't the problem of that page.
Right.
It happened a few pages ago.
Exactly.
You know,
Yeah.
few being it could be 100 pages ago. Who knows? But the point is that in the previous pages, something took you in a direction that didn't allow for a resolution that's going to actually work, and you have to kind of
Yeah.
figure out where the what the root causes and go back and work your way back through it. And I think the other thing is um, it's a preciousness thing for a lot of
Hmm.
people when they scream and yell, about not being able to do a thing. And I'm like, well, I think a lot of it comes to this fear factor of not living up to your dreams and expectations of what you want this to be.
Yeah.
So rather than just, sort of doing this pitch out there to the universe when you're making a thing saying, listen, it's going to suck. And I
Oh
just have to
yeah.
rely on the fact that I'll be able to fix the thing that sucks. So it becomes a thing that's worth, looking at.
Yeah. I mean, even like I think even highly accomplished writers and unlike like people who are like made millions off their writing or whatever would probably all tell you that like their first drafts are terrible
Mm-hmm.
and you know um, just like garbage and it's not. But that's the thing is that nobody you're not putting the first draft into the world. It's like
Right.
that's like just for you and or maybe like I don't know an editor or something. But
Yeah.
it's like you always have like a chance to like refine it and I read something recently that I thought was really a nice way of putting it. Where somebody said, I forget who said it, but they said that like the first draft is basically you're putting the sand in the sandbox
Hmm.
and knowing that you're going to be able to build a castle out of it later.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah,
Well, yeah. A tip of the cap to whoever said that. I think that's a
yeah,
no. I mean, I think that's a beautiful way of putting it. It sounds so Neil Gaiman-y, doesn't it?
yeah. It might be Neil Gaiman, but I don't think it was. But
Are
it
we
wouldn't surprise.
misattributing something
It
to?
really wouldn't surprise me if it
No, of
was. But
course, of course. Once again, he did it. Made it.
yeah,
He said that perfectly inspiring piece of wisdom. So, am I off my rocker that you also do creative direction as well?
oh yeah, no, I do. Yeah,
Yeah,
like copywriting and creative
yeah.
direction, mostly for ad
Hmm.
agencies.
Are
Yeah.
you in house or are you freelance or what's your status for that?
Um, Now I'm freelance
Okay.
now. I was in house for like a number of years.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, the industry is in a very odd place right now.
it
So
is.
freelance is, a lot of people are freelancing.
Yeah, I have a friend of mine in an ad agency. I think he's back in New York. I don't remember. I'm not 100% sure, but he was lives in New Jersey and was really happy when the pandemic came and he got to work at home.
Hmm.
And I just kept thinking, like, having worked in design firms, and I kept going, like, I'm really worried about the state of our creative agencies around the country because those conversations, that the random ones that you have where that idea comes out of that random conversation, they're gone.
Hmm.
They're
Yeah.
effectively eliminated, which really just relies on a lot of creativity happening in a vacuum, which
Yeah.
I don't think is as it's I don't I won't say it's not a pretty way of creating things, this randomness, but the bottom line is that it's a higher contact patch, like a car. The tires have more grip on the ground, and I think if everybody is sort of spread out, we lose a lot of that contact.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you know, it's like, you know, I also like I live in Jersey, work in Manhattan usually, but it's like everybody's kind of like home experience is like different, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
And that kind of like not that I love like, an hour on the train or whatever, like commuting in, but it's like, but there is like something like when everybody's kind of like at the office at the same time and everybody's, you know, doing all the kind of like after work social stuff together. It's like you kind of all a little more on the same page. Whereas like, working from home, it's like, I might have a day where like, yeah, I'm working, but I also have to like run out and buy groceries, or I
Sure.
have to,
Yeah.
mow lawn. But then when, well, like, my teammate has to, is like working feverishly, or, there's just like a little bit of a disconnect
Hmm.
between like what everybody's doing at any given moment that makes it a little more challenging. And then it's like, I think with just sort of like overall, just like the economy and like the tenor of things, you have like most clients that are doing advertising are like being very, very cost conscious, very conservative, very not willing to kind of uh, take chances or do things that are
Right.
really like, bold. And it's like, again, it just makes it that much harder to like get everyone on the same page where you can maybe like have a better chance of like pushing something like that through when everybody's all scattered. So,
Yeah.
it's challenging, but, you know,
Yeah.
that's what we do.
So I mean, well, so I came into, advertising design through comic books. That was like sort of my post comic book career. I was like, okay,
Uh huh.
what do I do next? And I happened to be teaching at a advertising design school, and I was like, oh well, this seems to be kind of a logical landing pad. Were you just a big, sort of writing fan and comic fan, and then said, I'm gonna, write some stuff on the side?
Yeah, no, I was always like a writing fan, and I think like when I was in like high school and college, I was like, I had it in my mind that like I wanted to be like a writer, like a fiction writer.
Hmm.
Like I would write like great like sci-fi novel or fantasy novel or something like that. But I was young and didn't have a lot of the like strength that you need to like get through a novel. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? Like I would like run out of steam like I don't know 3 or 4 chapters in, and I just had like a whole tranche of like unfinished stuff.
It's so, yeah, it's frustrating.
You know, and but like in the meantime, I was like, well, I really need to like do something that is going to like pay my bills, and
Hmm.
I had a friend who worked at an ad agency who said, um, why don't you, like come in? And so I actually started in advertising in like the IT department. Like it was literally
Oh
like
wow.
a part-time job that I was doing my senior year of college. And like I was like working on people who were working on ads, like fixing their computers and
Hmm.
looking at what they were doing and being like, wow, that looks like way more fun than what I'm doing. How do I, and I started making friends, and how do I do that? How do I do what you do? And with the help of like some friends and mentors, got like a portfolio together and started doing that. And like, but in my head, it was always like, oh, but like my writing is like separate from like
Hmm.
whatever I'm doing at the ad agency. Um, and then at a certain point, I had like an idea that I again, like it was like an aborted attempt at a novel. And I was just thinking about it, and I was like, like, what about like a comic book? Like I've
Yeah.
always loved comics, but I never really tried writing one. And I didn't even really know how to like write a comic script. So I was just like, I don't even know what's involved. So I just started doing some research, and I found like an online class that was supposed to teach like comic script writing. And basically like the class at the end of it, you like wound up with like a 5-page comic script.
Hmm.
Excuse me. And I just said, okay, well, you know, I've already invested this much time and money into it, and I have this script. Let me just try to get it drawn, and because I can't draw, so so I was like, let me try to find an artist, and I'm going to produce this, and you know, if it's if it comes out terrible or if it's like really hard and I don't like it, I don't need to ever do it again. But let me just do it just to do it. And I did it. I found an artist online. The pages came in, they were great. And it was just so exciting to like do it and then see it finished, that like just having that one finished thing boosted my confidence so much that I was like, okay, well, I can do this again. And I did another 5 page story and another 5 page story, and then eventually moved on to like a little bit longer stuff, and started going to comic conventions and meeting people in the industry and submitting work. And yeah, and then eventually I got my first. I was self-publishing for a while, but eventually got my first series picked up by a publisher called IDW.
Mm-hmm.
They put it out in 2016. It was called Gutter Magic. It was a
Oh yeah,
fantasy
sure. Yeah,
story.
yeah.
Yeah, and then from there, it was just sort of like just building on that. Like, you know, then I had like Gutter Magic was sort of like my portfolio for comics. Like I would, you know,
Well,
I would,
it's proof of
yeah,
concept in the terms of like
yeah, exactly,
I can do this. You know, it's
yeah,
because it's tough, man. It's tough to like it's tough to do the thing. You know, we all have the thing like you were saying about the novel. I mean, I too. I mean, I had that. I'm like, okay, here I know what I want to write. I know the story. It's going to be great. And then a chapter and a half in, I'm just looking at that blinking cursor, going, I don't know what to do next.
yeah,
And
yeah,
and I think it's like, and it's kind of interesting that you were very like, okay, well, let me just find someone who can give me at least the sort of the direction, the encouragement, and the time. And I guess maybe that reflects back to your getting into advertising because you asked the question. You didn't just go like,
yeah,
"Boy, they got a better job than me. My life sucks," you know, like versus like accepting some sort of fate. You were like, "How can I make? How can I change mine?"
yeah. I mean, that was big, because I think like if I hadn't done that, you know, I mean, I can't say for sure, but like, you know, I could just very easily have like been doing the same thing. Like there are people I worked with like at that first job that are still doing
Mm-hmm.
that. You know, like you can like build a career in it. So it's it really is just like asking the question, and just being like honest about it. You know, it's like, you know, like it's like, yeah, like I want to do that. It's not like, you know, not trying to trick anybody
No,
into, you know, um, getting something that they don't want to give up. It's like, you know, it's like, it's really just like, you know, you're pretty awesome. Like, how do I become as awesome
right?
as you? Or,
you're like,
you know
you're
what I
like, I don't
mean?
want you. I want to steal your life. I just want to. I
Yeah.
want to do something that I can feel pretty good about.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think most people are very happy to kind of like share and help people out. You know, it's
Mm-hmm.
not the sort of thing where, um, you know, it's like a zero sum game where like, you know, in order for me to win, you have to lose. It's like you know, there's plenty of room out there for like everybody to like, you know, anybody who wants to write a comic or make a comic to
Mm-hmm.
make theirs. And, you know, so I've always, and, you know, in advertising too, it's like, you know, you might be in competition for like a certain position or a certain job or something,
Yeah.
but just like, but on the whole, it's not like, you know, wanting to do it is like, you know, gonna like put anybody else out. So most people are like very happy to help, or like, you know, at least with like knowledge and things like that.
Yeah. So what year was that that you worked your way into advertising?
Ooh, like the early
Okay.
2000s.
All right.
I
All
want
right.
to say like
All right. I'm just.
2005, 2007, something like
And was
that.
that in New
I'm not
York or
sure.
was that somewhere else?
Yeah,
Okay.
that was in New York, um, at this agency called BBDO.
Sure. Yeah.
And yeah, I started out in the presentations department. So basically, like what I was doing was like actually like design work, but not like
Hmm.
um, highbrow design work. Like it was very much like
PowerPoint design
putting
work.
together like
Yeah.
PowerPoint designs and things. And the funny thing about that era was that um, there was kind of a generation of like art directors who kind of um, came up doing traditional paste up when they were doing an ad, um, and not really knowing like programs like Photoshop and InDesign and Illustrator and stuff like that. Really not knowing it very well, or if they did know it, they were not like super fast and like super efficient.
Hmm.
So a big part of my job was sitting there with like
The sen
creatives
the
and being
senior
like,
person who had no idea what the yeah.
yeah, being like, can you move this? Can you
Yeah.
move that? And it was just, it was like an sort of like I was helping them, but it was also like an education.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? Because every day I would see like what what kind of ideas they were putting forth, what was making it through, what wasn't making it through,
Right.
what they liked, what they didn't like, and again, it was like through those relationships, I found people that were willing to kind of like look at my work in terms of like a portfolio and say like, okay, well, like this is good, this isn't, you should work on this, you should not work on that, and I just started taking the jobs that like nobody really wanted to do. So it's like, so I was working with people who like, let's say for one of the first clients I worked on was FedEx, right?
Hmm.
So I had a friend, creative director for FedEx. They're doing a TV campaign, so they're doing like 3 TV commercials, but FedEx also wants a bunch of Facebook posts,
Hmm.
and they want a radio spot, and they want some print headlines, and they want all this stuff, and it's like, and my CD friend, what do they care about? They care about the TV
Sure.
because they get to go shoot the commercial like in LA, and
Hmm.
that's what everybody's going to see, and nobody's going to read the Facebook posts or the banner ads or whatever. So I was just like, hey, I'm trying to get some practice writing. Can I like, help out? Sure. I'm like, we need 10 posts. So I would send them like, 20, 30, whatever.
Yeah.
We need some radio scripts, and like help them out enough that it was like eventually they were just like, oh, well, then they would start bringing stuff to me,
Hmm.
be like, hey, do you have time to do this? Do you have time to do that? And for a while I was doing both jobs, and then eventually it was just like, all right, just you know move your desk up here by us and start working up here, and that's really just how it happened. I was still at BBDO. I was there for like about a decade.
Okay.
Yeah, and then just kind of went on from there, like up through, like I started as a copywriter, and then senior copywriter, ACD,
Hmm.
CD.
Yeah, that was a time I was working at Condé Nast. I was in there
Mm-hmm.
for was it I don't even remember the name of the magazine. It was Lucky Magazine, possibly. I can't remember which one it was. And we were still using Quark at the time.
Yeah, I
And
remember those days.
then, like, not too long after that, or during that time, I was talking with the art director at the time, and she's like, "Yeah, I think we're gonna switch over to InDesign because I was using InDesign for my
Mm-hmm.
own like freelance work, and I'm like, you really love it because we're using Illustrator, Photoshop, and Quark, and I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
it's so much more compatible. And then I remember when they switched over, and I just kept saying to people, I'm like, everybody's going to be switching over to InDesign. They're like, what are you talking about? Everyone's been using Quark for 20 years. I'm like, trust me,
Yeah,
like it's just going to go overnight, and it did. It just poof changed.
yeah. I remember they had like they gave us like a seminar or something. Like it
Mm-hmm.
was just like, it was just sort of like, everybody, like we're gonna show you like how to migrate over, like how to, basically it was just like, here's how to do what you do in Quark in InDesign,
Yeah.
and it was just like, from the minute I picked it up, I was like, this is so much better. Like,
So much better. And it's so
yeah.
funny because you figure, I mean, Adobe. had to have, like, for them, I think it was a big investment to do in design, and I don't think the investment was so much on the programming end. I think it was on the education end. I think they had to
Hmm.
spend a ton of money because they were going for every ad agency in the country. They were going for every publication in the country. Like the list was huge. And for them to say, we need to get the sort of the holy trinity of programs locked down, that was the move.
Hmm.
Because this was really still, I mean, the web stuff was all very much coding at that point. It
Oh
was
yeah.
Dreamweaver and coding. Like that's what you had,
Hmm.
and Flash.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they were really looking for how do we handle the sort of the creative, classic design end of things, and then
Hmm.
yeah, but it was an interesting period. Okay, so that's good to know, like the timeline for that. So then I guess somewhere within that, the next 5 years, you started saying, okay, I'm gonna venture into doing some comic books.
Yeah. I mean, that was like around 2009, 2010
Mm-hmm.
when it was actually, no, it was 2008. And I remember it was because, um, my first son was born in 2008. And, I was thinking to myself, like, wow, babies are a lot of work. I really don't have as much free time as I used to.
Mm-hmm.
So what I really need to do is in like, the couple of hours of free time I might get like in a given day or a given week, do I want to spend that just chilling out and doing the things I like watching TV, movies, playing video games, or do I want to dedicate that to writing? Because previously I was able to do both,
Mm-hmm.
like I'll write sometimes, relax some other times, but I was like really like, I was like, this is the time where like, I might have to give up writing,
Yeah.
because I just won't have the time for it. I might have to like maybe not permanently, but like at least for like a few years. But I was like, no, I was like, I'm going to start dedicating whatever free time I do have to writing. And I talked to my wife about taking the class, and she was on board. It was like 1 hour a week, so it wasn't like a huge,
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't like going to college or something like that. And then that was really what kind of like got me into shape as far as like a writing practice. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Well,
Um,
what was that? Because I mean, like, you're not alone in that. Like, I think there's so many
mhm,
people out there who want to do the thing, whatever it is.
mhm.
And the hardest part is making that time available to
Yeah,
yourself. And, I remember struggling with the idea of writing, 10-ish years ago. And I had the hardest time even saying, I can write. I can be a writer. Like, because I did writing in comic books, but it was only to solve a problem. Like,
right.
oh, hey, the writer can't do this thing. And I'm like, well, I can't not do this project. So what do we need to do? And I would write
Hmm.
something. Or if a script was not good and an editor didn't want to make the writer rewrite it, I rewrote it. It was all these
Hmm.
kinds of sort of like things to do to get the job done. But what's always scared me was dialogue, terrified me as a kid. Like, I was just that felt so much more permanent than a story idea.
Right.
But having that sort of like temerity to say, okay, well, this little space of whatever this is going to be mine, and I'm going to do the thing in this space. Like, what were the things that I guess you carved out to do to give yourself that space?
Yeah. Well, it was just like, you know, it was just kind of like being a little bit more deliberate about when my free time was going to be,
Mm-hmm.
So it was like a lot of it was like coordinating with my wife, because we were both taking care of the baby, but I also had work, so it was like, okay, well, work, I'm going to go to work,
Mm-hmm.
right? But like, and you know, but I would like, you know, an hour on Saturday or whatever where I could just go to I'll go to a coffee shop and I'll write. I'll come back. And, the rest of the day is whatever the rest of the day is. But like for that hour, like that's my writing time, and it really is like not that it's not always easy to like commit that time, but
Mm-hmm.
it really is that simple. It's really just saying like an hour, and like if that's all you have, that's all you have.
Yeah.
I would do like I would say like my train ride. We were living in Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm.
I was working in Manhattan, so um, not so much on the train ride back, but on the train ride in the morning when I was still kind of like fresh. I'd be like, it was like a 40-minute train ride, and if you don't want to count like sitting down and then like getting up and like all that stuff. So, but I was like, so I got like a good like 30 minutes. So if I can get a seat, like
Mm-hmm.
I can get my notebook out and just like write in the notebook, and that was it. And it's just it was like you know a lot of it is it's just grabbing the time where you can get it,
Mm-hmm.
but then making sure that you use like whatever time you can get you put to use.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, the
and
notebook
that's
is
really like the
huge.
trick of it.
Like that,
Yeah.
like I think that's like one practice I could always like encourage people to do is not just have
Hmm.
it, not just write in a notebook, but get in the practice of every time something pops in your head, write it down in the notebook
Yeah,
because
just
you'll
jotting it
never
down.
remember.
Hmm. Yeah, and it could be like the most profound thing that you think of, and then like the doorbell will ring, and it'll
Right.
just like fly out of your head.
Sure. Yeah.
And sometimes you won't even remember that you forgot it. You know what I
Totally.
mean? Like,
Totally.
yeah,
Because someone's selling you gutters and you go, oh,
yeah.
and then that's it. That's the end of the greatest idea ever. Yeah, I think I mean, and I'm a huge proponent of handwriting as much as possible.
Hmm.
I'm not so bold as to like handwrite, you know, um, a novel. That's crazy talk. But the idea of just letting your hand and eye do a thing, like in this sort of real creative.
Hmm. Yeah, there's definitely yeah, like a physical kind of like neurological pathway kind
Mhm.
of component to it or something.
Yeah,
That's really useful.
yeah. No, I think it's super important. I just and I like the idea of taking all the times I think about like when you're not reading enough, like you're just not reading enough
Hmm.
books, and then you kick yourself. But then like the times when you're reading books, you're carrying them around with you everywhere. Like I'll carry the
Hmm.
book that I'm reading wherever I go because there's
Yeah.
5 minutes here, there's 10 minutes there, and I will just boop right into the book, have a great time. And I burn through books by doing that versus, all right, I'll do it right before I go to bed. And then it's like everything
Hmm.
tacks all the way up to like right before you go to bed. And you're like, oh, I guess I'm not reading tonight. Um,
Right. Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I think if you can kind of take that, if you don't have the luxury of not having kids, which are their own version of a PlayStation, so you get to play with them, but
Hmm.
you don't, if you can't have this time afforded to you, you have to make the time somehow. And
Yeah. Yeah. And you also, yeah, I think you also like, you just have to, I think, be okay with the fact that it might take longer than you initially
totally.
envisioned or wanted it to. So, like it might take you like a year or something to write something that
Hmm.
you want it to be done in like 3 months or whatever. But it's like, sorry, it's like, life is not on your timetable.
Well, did you looking thinking about those those novel ideas that you put in the book in the in the drawer, did you pull
Mm.
them out and say, hey, can I adapt this to a comic book? Or did any of those make a second life?
Well, Gutter Magic did.
Okay.
That was like
Which was the
the main
first.
one. That was the first
Yeah.
one. Since then, not really. I think a lot of them sort of, well, a lot of them weren't very good, and I can kind of like say that now and see that now with the benefit of like a little distance and more like, knowledge of like myself as a storyteller and storytelling in general. But I think it's more like I would pull elements from them that would kind of like come to life in new and different ways,
Mm-hmm.
rather than like just straight up being like, oh, I remember this idea, I'm gonna write it as a comic.
Yeah.
It was more just like, oh yeah, like I had that idea for I don't know, like a fantasy country or something, and let
Mm-hmm.
me see if I can incorporate that, or that was like an interesting character name, let me, or character idea, what could I do with that now? But it was like kind of less about like lifting it like out of the drawer whole cloth and getting back to work on it again, and just sort of like remembering certain elements that of like what I wanted to do in the first place, and just doing it now with like more skill and knowledge than I had at that time.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think there are things that we are attracted to, especially when we start trying to create stuff that sort of sit in our
Mm-hmm.
head. Like there are these things that sort of are the catalyst to do the thing. And then of
Mm-hmm.
course craft can kind of, step in and say, not so quick,
Yeah.
Sonny. Um, but I think we
Yeah.
can always kind of retap into that.
Yeah. And I mean, and the other thing is that, you kind of, or at least for me, I don't know, luckily enough, like I haven't like stopped having new ideas.
You know.
So it's like, you know, it's like, yeah, like I had like old ideas that may have like seemed like important at the time, or like were very relevant to like what I was going through at the time. But I think like the newer ideas that come up are things that like easier to me to write for, because like they're sort of bound up with like the stuff that's going on in my life now.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Whereas like you know now I can write like a father character, and it's going to mean a lot more than the father character I would have wrote when I was like 19 or
Mm-hmm.
20 years old, because then it would have just been like my best guess, whereas
Right.
like now I have like I can make a more educated guess. And it's not that it's not like you can only write what you know. It's like like I've written about you know characters who are cannibals in my horror stuff, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
not a cannibal, and I would never be accountable, we hope. But you know what I mean? It's like it's my sort of like best guess as to like what would kind of like push someone
To that edge.
to that.
Yeah.
But it's just like I found like the stuff that's going on in your life like works its way into your writing,
Mm-hmm.
whether you kind of want it to or not. So the more of your life you've lived, the more interesting stuff you can kind of work in there.
I totally agree. And I think I get so much inspiration outside of traveling and seeing people and, sort of interacting with others. Reading is what reading and sort of getting as much information from as wide of a net as possible, because
Mm-hmm.
the damnedest things just tip off and go, oh, that would be a really interesting thing if I tweaked this and then plunked it into here. What a fun little thing that would be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's like it's like if you wanted to like when I was younger, like they like we were talking about like there were stories with things like robots and artificial intelligence and stuff like that,
Mm-hmm.
and I probably had like ideas for like sci-fi stories that like incorporated those, or but like today, like we're still arguing and discussing the same things, but it means something totally different today than it
Yeah.
does like back then. So you know like going back to old stuff, it's like a lot of times it just doesn't, like the world has changed, and if those ideas haven't, you know
Yeah. No, the people don't change. The
yeah,
circumstances do. And
yeah.
we're yeah, well, we're really, really good at repeating ourselves. Just a different
Hmm.
just a different dance partner. Um, so with IDW, that was a pitch. So you pitched. gutter magic with them?
Yeah, well, I mean, I had put together the first issue on my own
Okay.
and kind of just self-published it. But when I say self-published, like it's not like you could go to a store and buy it or something. Like it was literally like I printed up like maybe 100 copies, and I would just take it with me to like comic conventions and hand it out to people and things like that. But I had gotten friendly with an editor over there, and sent the first issue and said like, look, like this is just like issue one. I want to do like, um, I have like a whole series in mind, and that was basically my pitch. Was like
Hmm.
like I pitched the whole series, but I was like, but this, like if you look at this issue one, like this is like a representation of like, like what we want to do. And they he liked it. He showed it to his higher ups. They
Hmm.
liked it, and that was basically it. And then it was like, okay, well, like whereas like I had this issue one that I had been like working on for like 2-3 years, and like that was like my only thing. And then it was like, okay, well, I got back in touch with the artist, and I was like, great, like now we can do issues 2, 3, and 4. So like we got back on that and put it out through them, and yeah, like again, then it was just like, then I was just taking the collected edition around, showing it to editors, being like, hey,
You just had a bigger prop.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's like the same thing, like over and
Uh-huh.
over again. You just sort of like you show the work that you did, or I think like when it really kind of like uh, the big difference, or like the big difference I noticed was there was one year, I think, when my first horror book was called Road of Bones, and Road of Bones came out, and I went to New York Comic Con that year, and I had been going to New York Comic Con for like the past like 5 years or whatever, and it was the first time when I would go around to like a publisher booth and be like, "Oh, hey, I'm Rich Douek. I wrote Road of Bones," and then I would be here. Oh yeah, I heard of that.
Nice.
Like I heard that was good, and then I was like, oh, like like because before it'd be like, here's my book, Gutter Magic, and it's like, oh, okay, I'll check it out. Or it's
Thanks.
like, yeah, thanks. It's just sort of like that was like when I started to feel like, okay, well, this is like more than a hobby. It's
Hmm.
not full career yet, but because I still have to have a day job and things like that. But it's like I'm actually doing this.
Hmm.
Well, it's like when sort of like your, I guess, reputation precedes you a little bit.
When the work when the work is recognized, and I'm not talking an
Yeah,
award, I'm just saying that your peers go, oh
yeah,
yeah, that's a thing, and that's when you go, oh,
yeah,
it's a and that's the there's the sick twisted bit about comic books is like that's enough to keep most of us going, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, because there's not a lot of money in them.
No,
So
no, it's not a big cash cow.
yeah,
Yeah, no, but that's yeah, but I think that's, I mean, I think it's great, like that model. And listen, the model isn't different than doing some sample pages and showing the latest sample pages. You were just,
mhm,
you were paying someone to do some artwork, and you got
yeah,
an actual product, and you would go to the next thing. And I think that's really, that's a smart way to do it, because
yeah.
it's a lot easier to get someone to read a comic book than to read a script.
Oh, nobody reads scripts. That was one thing.
I read scripts. I'll tell you,
Well,
I read
but
them,
I mean, like
but
I'm saying like when you're talking about like pitching something
yeah.
to like an editor or something like that,
Hmm.
it's like you can't pitch with just a script
Yeah.
because they don't have they just literally don't have time to read them.
Right.
Like so, you really kind of have to pitch with a finished comic,
Hmm.
but or or at least like
The artwork.
something in finished form. Like it doesn't have to be the whole book, but it's like if you do like even if you got somebody to draw like the first 5 pages of the issue or the first 10 pages or whatever it
Hmm.
is, it's like if you're like just trying to grab somebody like on the convention floor or at a publisher booth and just be like, hey, can you take a look at my comic? Like you have to like have like a comic to show them. Like you can't show them a script. They're not
Yeah.
going to like stop everything and like sit and like read your script. But, like the comic,
Get
they
out
can kind of like
get the highlighter
leaf
out.
through and get the idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. So you said it took a few years to get that first issue of Gutter Magic done, and then the sort of
Hmm.
the light turns green.
Yeah.
What was the internal like element? I mean, listen, you're working professionally as an as a copywriter, so you know how to turn things on and do the work, but it's a different world. And
Hmm.
I were you sort of servicing as editor and art director for the book with your artist? Like, were you over kind of like,
Yeah.
yeah, okay.
Yeah. I did all the layout. I did, I put it in InDesign, made the
Hmm.
PDFs, I designed the logo, did all that stuff. Um, just to like save money. And I mean, and the reason it took like 2 or 3 years is not because I didn't like have the story or not that like it took that long to write. It was really just like, you know, when you're, putting a comic book together, it's like, I wasn't going to like ask somebody to draw an entire issue on credit.
On
So
gratis,
I
yeah.
was like, I need to pay the artist for what they're doing. And it was just sort of like, okay, well, this month I have like $100 to put towards it, or
Right.
this month I have 300 or whatever. So it was like really just like, hey, Brett is the artist I was working. His name's Brett Barkley, really talented guy. And I was just like, Brett, like I got enough for, the next 5 pages. So, and it was just sort of like banking the pages. And it just took a while to like,
Hmm.
to get, to get it all together. But, and then it was like, and then, you know, and that was the line art. And then you got to find a color artist. Then you have to find a letterer and, you have to get it printed and things like that. So it was just, it took a while to just sort of like, just materially like,
Yeah.
get everything together. Um, and, 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 and that was the thing. It was like, by the time it was done, I had sunk like, a couple $1,000s into it. And I was just like, well, like if I keep going, like I'm going to start have to use like my credit card or something. And so I was like, let me roll with this for a little bit, get
Hmm.
this out there, show this to people. And, if people are starting to like it and it's resonating with people, will do more. But like, if this one does like suck, or this is one that like, nobody likes, like maybe I'll have to like think of another one or,
Hmm.
like do something else or like whatever.
I mean, I wrote it the other day to someone, and I just said, like, there are those times. Oh, I think I can't remember what it was, but I mean, there's a time in your life where you just have to say, I'm going to place a bet on myself.
Yeah. Hmm.
And, you know, they don't always pay off. They pay
Yeah.
off far fewer than they actually often pay off. And, but I think if you do enough of a thing, um, enough of professional creative work, you can get to a point where you realize, like, okay, I'm not fooling myself. Like
Right.
I know what people write checks for. I've seen it. I've done it. I think this, so this is not some sort of wacky, sort of game I'm playing with myself, but the time and the costs are real. And you have to kind
Yeah.
of say, okay, well, I'm going to do this, and that's not going to deter me. If it takes 2 years, it takes 2 years, but you do it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's really what it is. It's exactly what you said. It's like placing a bet on yourself, or like
Hmm.
taking a chance on yourself, because you don't know like what's going to be popular. You don't know what's not going to be popular. Like I've had books that I thought were, of my own and like other people's that I thought were going to like do amazing and were barely a blip. And then there were ones that, I didn't really have any expectations for, that, people will come up and tell me that they loved. So,
Yeah.
you know, um, like I didn't think Road of Bones was going to be popular at all because I never thought of myself as a horror writer.
Mm-hmm.
I was always more of a speculative fiction, like, science fiction, fantasy, whatever you want to call it. Um, and But it just so happened that when I was reading about the setting for Bones, which was like the Soviet gulag in Siberia, I just thought to myself, I was like, I don't really need to kind of like take this to like some other planet or whatever. Like, this is like a really cool setting. Like, I can write it here, and I can write it as a horror story. I've never written horror. I don't know if I'm any good at writing horror, but I'm going to give it a shot,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And it like that book, um, I wasn't known as a horror writer or anything, but that book went. I think the first issue went to 3 printings,
Mm.
and got nominated for a Bram Stoker Award, which is like, totally unexpected.
Yeah.
But and I was just like, okay, like great. I still don't know that I'm a horror
Right.
writer, but like, but I guess at least I know I can do it pretty well, or to the point that like people like resonate with it. So so I've kept up like doing horror stuff, even though now I feel like a lot more comfortable writing it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but like if you had asked me, and I think even if you had asked the publisher whether that book was going to do good, they probably would have said no, probably not. Like I remember the editor in chief at the time said like, I love this book. I don't know how we're going to sell it, but
Mm-hmm.
I love it. And it's like, that's not exactly the words you want to hear from your publisher, that I
No.
don't know how to sell it. But, but I was like, okay, as long as you guys are behind it and we're going to do it, like,
Yeah.
we'll figure it out. And then like, and then it came out, favorable reviews, sold out. And then they were very happy. Then they
Sure.
were like, okay, now we know how to sell it. So, so yeah, but it just goes to show, like, you can't predict like
Mm-hmm.
what's gonna hit and what's gonna miss.
Well, there's a Spartan quality to that story in your writing, and
Mm-hmm.
the um, the sort of lifeless landscape that your
Mm-hmm.
artist brings to the table. I think those two come together really well and create a almost in a weird twisted way, a Treasure of the Sierra Madre kind of
Right.
setting, where you have
Mm-hmm.
these people who are struggling in an environment that is trying to kill them at all cost, and but they're being driven by something else, and in this case is survival, and versus treasure hunting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, the art had a lot to do with it
Yeah.
too. I mean, Alex is an amazing artist, and you know, um, like the book, like I don't think at the time, I don't think there were many books that like looked like it. So it was like very kind of like different. Um, so yeah, I mean, like like when I talk about it as like my book, I mean like our book,
Mhm.
like the entire team. But but yeah, and then like everything I learned writing Road of Bones, I put into Sea of Sorrows. Everything I learned writing Sea of Sorrows, I put into Breath of Shadows, and that was just sort of like the progression there, and like the horror stuff.
So what was the internal vision for you? Because it's there are two ways to kind of go through a creative career. You do the work that
Mm.
gets put in front of you, or you have like some sort of further goal where you're like, I got to get to this point, and then you have to kind of figure out how you get there. Did you have that picture, or were you kind of just like, I'm happy doing this for now, and then a picture appeared?
Yeah, I think like for me, like there's certain things like that I would love to do, as far as like if somebody put in front of me like hey, we want you to write Superman, or we want you to write Batman, or we want you to write or even like something like not like superhero involved, like we want you to write, I don't know, Star Wars or whatever. Like I don't like whatever those things are. Like I would love to do them, but I think for me, it's like every story that I tell, whether it's like for um, like a character that exists already or something of my own, it's it's for me just it's what makes me happy and makes me what I do is like telling the story. You know,
Hmm.
it's weird. It's almost like I don't think I don't really have like an agenda as far as like some philosophy I'm trying to like impart to the world or some like great insight I have that I don't think anybody else has. It's for me, a lot of it is really just sort of, um, I enjoy the process of going from an idea and turning it into something that I can communicate, like taking whatever's in my head and
Hmm.
putting it out in a way that like somebody who's outside of my head can understand it and
Right.
enjoy it and, and feel hopefully some of the same things that I was feeling like when I was creating it, you know? So it's almost like, so for me, like there's no like end in sight. Like there's no sort of like, okay, well, I'm just going to finish my Lord of the Rings and then I'm never going to write again. Like I'm going to be done.
Hmm.
Like for me, it's like, um, it's just like, I enjoy the act, like as much of a slog as writing can be sometimes. And as much of, as hard work as it is, it's like, I enjoy the act of it enough that like, I don't feel like I'm ever going to feel like satisfied or that I'm ever going to stop, um, you know, uh, at least trying to get stuff out there.
Hmm.
So, so it really is almost like a spiritual thing, I guess. Like, I don't know, like it's not like, it's not just about like the finished product for me. It's also a lot about like the process and the practice of it.
Yeah.
Like I find like when I don't write or when I don't have time to write for whatever reason, life or whatever, that's like when I'm like miserable. And then I'll just sort of like remember like, oh yeah, I haven't written in a while. Like I should really just like sit down and do some writing. And then lo and behold, I feel better. So
Yeah. 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 Why am I acting like a bastard?
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I can relate to that. So, as opposed to, negotiating, an hour at Starbucks a week with an infant in the house. Um, what's the process for you now? I guess we're kind of 10ish years into it. So,
Hmm. Yeah. Well, now like I do balance things with my deadlines and stuff, but I just try to take like the morning most days, like 9 to 12 or whatever, or 8 to 12 depending, to just basically like writing business kind of stuff. So it's
mhm,
like, so there'll be like some writing, there'll be like emails following up with things, since I'm doing comics and graphic novels, like there's like I have to like kind of review art that comes in and make corrections and things like that. But it's basically like having like those kind of like the morning is like my kind of like office hours of
mhm,
like, I'll be like doing the actual writing, doing the business aspects of it. And then the afternoons, I just try to, um, like my kids are older now, but like they're still like they come home from school and have to take care of them a little bit and stuff. So that's kind of like also like the afternoons and evenings are my time to like kind of take in like take in like life and or even like read stuff or watch TV shows or things like that, or just sort of like feed the like put the stuff in that's going to like kind of tumble around in my head for a while and then
mhm.
come out when I write. And then but then it's also like, but then like if I have a deadline and I need to make more progress, like I'll devote more time, like maybe evenings or, um, a lot of times, just to like switch things up, like on the weekend, like I'll go out and like write at like a coffee shop or like a local, like, like the weather's nice, like man, I might like stay outside or something like that. But just to switch things up and like, switch scenery up and different vibe and things like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, and again, it's like, that's like the ideal and that I stick to, like, most of the time, but sometimes I don't.
Yeah.
And,
Life.
yeah, it's just life. And, you just sort of try to, yeah, have to like be okay with it,
Totally. Well, I mean,
Yeah.
it's aside from the sort of you know, the invasive nature of of life and work and all those things, they come into play.
Hmm.
But for me, like I have to be as sort of diligent as I can about myself. Just,
Yeah.
because if I'm not rigorous there, then if I don't care, then who cares, right? Like,
Right.
so
Yeah.
it's a battle in that respect.
Yeah. Like that's the thing. It's like, nobody, it's like, you don't, there's no, like, it's not like school where like you have a teacher grading you or like, making sure that like you show up
Hmm.
to take the test or like anything like that. Or it's not even like, you know, it's not even like a 9 to 5 job where like you have to clock in or clock out. Like there's no, like, it's really just like, you. So,
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, no, I get it. I mean, my schedule is pretty similar. I'm 9 to 1, and then after
Hmm.
I scarf down some food, I'll do client work or whatever I need to in the afternoons, and
Yeah.
that's just kind of how the day goes. So looking at the script now, the looking at the blinking cursor, what is your viewpoint on it as opposed to when you 10 years ago? Like 10 years ago, you were putting together your scripts in one fashion. And now how do you view it and how do you approach it?
Mm. Well, I think now, I think like in the beginning, I was a lot more verbose than I am now. Like, and I think that's mainly like a confident. I think it's like two things when you're writing a script, because like the script isn't like the final product,
Hmm.
so it's really not meant for anybody then except the artist who's going to like have to draw from that script. So I think in the beginning there's sort of like or I think a lot of people, and myself included, had a tendency to kind of like really be concerned that like I would be understood, that the artist would understand like what I'm
Sure.
trying to show here. So
Hmm.
I would be very like put in a lot of information about like what I had in my head about like being there. Um, but I think what I've learned over the years is what the artist needs from me is actually a lot less than what I was giving them in the very beginning. So like uh, and like I said, I think it's like a confidence thing, because like I have to be like sort of like I had growing confidence that I could get my ideas across more succinctly, but it was also a trust thing. Like I think when you're working with like a really good artist, like you want to kind of give them room to interpret the script uh, the way that they see best. Like you want them to like bring something to the table. Like I don't
Hmm.
want to like be dictating like every angle and every prop that's going to be in the scene. Like like at the end of the day, if I say like draw a kitchen, like it doesn't matter if there's like 3 coffee mugs on the wall or 4 coffee mugs on the wall,
Right.
and that's like a that's a
Unless it matters.
unless it matters. Like
Right.
if it matters, it matters.
Yeah.
But if it doesn't, it doesn't. And like, giving the artist, I think most artists that I work with appreciate that sort of freedom
Mm-hmm.
to say like, like if I like, if you're talking about something like, let's say something really simple, like a fight scene where like the hero is like punching out the villain, it's like, there's a lot of different ways you could draw that. There's a lot of different ways you could write that. You know
Mm-hmm.
what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's like, if I'm writing like, oh, like he's, punching with his left hand from low, like I catches him, like
Mm-hmm.
it's like, okay, like you can do it, but it's like, if I lock it in the script, then I'm kind of like taking away the artist's like choice to like say like, okay, well maybe like it'll look more dramatic from this angle, maybe it'll look more dramatic from that angle, maybe if I focus on the guy's eyes instead of the, you know what I mean,
Mm-hmm.
like whatever it is. I tend to find that like when you're working with like a good artist, it's like kind of the more freedom you give them to contribute to the way the page looks, the better the pages look, the more invested they are in the project.
Mm-hmm.
And you just sort of have to trust the process. And in the script writing stage, like trusting the process and letting go, it's like you're sort of like ceding a bit of control over like what the final project is going to look like.
Right.
And it's hard to be comfortable with that in the beginning because you just sort of like, it's scary to say like, I'm going to like let the page be what, like, I'm going to let
Mm-hmm.
the artist decide like what the page is going to look like, it's like, no, I have to like lock down like what this page is going to look like, otherwise it might look terrible.
Yeah.
But the really easy solve to that is to not, number one, as much as you can, don't work with people who you don't trust are going to do a good job. And if you do find yourself in the position um, where like it's a new artist that you've never worked with before and maybe not somebody that you necessarily chose, because sometimes when you get work for hire assignments, they say like, okay, we hired this artist to do it and this is who you're going to work with. And I don't think I've ever worked with anybody who's done like a bad job, but I'm just saying like when you're unfamiliar with the person and you don't really know them, then it's like, then okay, like, be a little more like, a little more detailed, a little more,
Mm-hmm.
um, clear, but also just recognize that like how to sift the stuff that matters from the stuff that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And the stuff that doesn't matter, it doesn't matter. So it's like,
Totally. I mean,
and that's it.
I mean, I
You
think
know?
we're plagued with, I think we're plagued with the comparison to, to brilliance, which is really tough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And in this industry, we put a few people up on pedestals, and and Alan Moore is a writer. We all put him on the script, on this
Yeah.
pedestal, and he's notorious for very detailed scripts. But he, for him, that's important to being able to tell the story. He wants to have all
Right.
this in there. And I don't think an artist like a Dave Gibbons needs that much direction, but that man is so technically gifted. He can take and all that information and still put it in a very clear and, beautiful fashion.
Right.
I don't,
And that's the thing is like everyone wants to like, it's like people want to be like Alan Moore,
sure.
but they're not Alan Moore. So it's
No.
like, Alan Moore is like, um, talented enough and I guess experienced enough to kind of like uh, earn the right to have a script that's three times as long as the finished
Totally.
project because it's like it's Alan Moore, but it's like me like writing my first thing or second thing or whatever. It's like that would be asking a lot uh, of an artist to make them read through all that,
Mm-hmm.
for a script that, you know, might be good, might be bad, but it's not, I'm not Alan Moore. You know what I mean?
No,
So,
and I think, I think, as you said earlier, it doesn't matter. Like if it doesn't
right.
matter, it was, and that was always my design ethos when I was teaching design, was that, like, listen, if you're doing an ad or you're doing a design piece, like, take everything out that doesn't support the message, because
Yeah.
it's just,
Mm-hmm.
it's a distraction. And
Mm-hmm.
look at what you need, and then that's the important thing. I like with covers, I would sit there when I had to do a cover, I would write a list of what I called, well, I guess I'm blurring it between that and design, but I call them mandatories. Like, this has to be here on the cover to tell this story. If I don't have this on
Right.
here, it fails. Everything else is superfluous. And I think that's a bit like, I like that approach, how you're thinking, like that kind of makes script writing in that kind of mindset of like, this is it, just tell what you need to tell. And let the artist, because I'll tell you from my experience, the best scripts that worked from were the ones that didn't have as much information in them.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the traditional Marvel style scripts, I think I performed better on, because I was like, oh, I'm invested, I get to tell a story here. And the DC scripts were much more sort of executioner, like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
here's what it
Yeah.
is, I'll just make this happen. Yeah. Yeah, I'm sticking by that statement.
Yeah.
um so, I mean, you've done some work for the big two, which is pretty
Yeah.
cool.
A little bit.
How
Mm-hmm.
did that come into play for you? Because, I mean, I guess it's hard to not be excited as a fan of comic books when you get to, someone hands
Oh yeah.
you, opens up the toy chest and says, "Hey, play with this
Play with
character,"
this.
and you're like, "Thank you."
Yeah, it's amazing, and it's like it's an amazing feeling, but it really just sort of comes from like building up a reputation and just sort of um, you know honestly, like just like networking, like for lack of a better term, like it's getting to meet editors, getting to know them, sending in your work, saying like here's my latest comic. If you ever have anything that I'd love to work with you on something. If you ever have anything you have a need for, please let me know. And you basically like that's basically what I did for years and years and years, and most of the time never hearing back or getting a very polite no,
Mm-hmm.
and still like it was like used to be 99% of the time I would hear nothing or get a very polite no, and now it's like 95% of the time. You know what I
Right.
mean? It's like
It's
it's
it's the right trajectory.
I haven't. Yeah, it's a trajectory, but it's like I haven't done a lot, but I've gotten to write a Superman story, a Spider-Man story,
Mm-hmm.
Ghost Rider, and like it's fun, and like I would love again, like I would love to sort of get the opportunity to really like get some of these characters for like a good chunk of time and be able to like really put my own spin on it, or and like uh, tell a really cool story with them. But at the end of the day, that's something that's not really in my control, so I
Mm-hmm.
can't really bet the farm on that. You know what I mean? It's like honestly, like I think maybe at this point I've done like 10 or 12 licensed stories. We're talking like Marvel, DC. I did some like stuff for Turtle, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Magic the Island, like all my licensed stuff or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. Like I think there was maybe like one of them, maybe two, where I asked and got the job. You know what I mean? Where I was like, "Hey,
Right.
I have an I have an idea for Superman," and the editor was like, "What is it?" And like, okay, like I like it. Let's do it. every other one was just sort of like me opening up my inbox one random afternoon,
Mm-hmm.
an editor saying, "Hey, like, do you have time, or are you interested in working on this?" And me being like, "Yeah, absolutely."
Mm-hmm.
But like, there's no way of knowing whether like there's no like magic number of times that I reached out to them, or no, like, like, it wasn't like, okay, well, this is Rich's 15th email to me. I'm finally gonna write him back.
They have no, the secret is, and I'm gonna give it all out here.
Uh-oh.
This is the comic book secret. Since they don't let you in the offices anymore at Marvel, editors get um, punch cards printed out with the names of all the people who want to work there. And every time they
uh
get some sort of like email or submission, they pull out the old clicker and chunk out comes a little, comic book shaped Chad. And
yeah.
when they finally
And
pull
there
your
you
name
go.
out and it's full, they go, well, hey, you're in luck.
Right. But so what I'm saying is, it's like, yeah, I want to do all that stuff, but like, it may happen, it may never
Yeah.
happen, and there's nothing I can do about it either way. So the only thing that I really have control over is my own stories, and honestly, like, I don't even have control over whether an idea I have, whether it gets published with IDW, or gets published with Image, or gets
Mm-hmm.
published with Boom. It's like, like, I have to submit those stories, I have to pitch them, and if everybody turns it, if every publisher turns it down, then I have to make the decision, like, am I going to put it put it in a drawer, or am I going to try to do it on myself, like maybe through crowdfunding, or whatever it is. You know what I mean? But it's like, really, like, the only part of the process I have any control over is the work I put into it. So
Yeah.
that's what I have to focus on, or at least what I try to keep in mind is, like, like, that's what I can do. It's like, what can I do? I can write.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. And you
that's really
can,
it.
and there's nothing, no
Yeah.
bad comes from generating your own thing and putting it out there in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Like that is far more effective in the long run than,
Mm-hmm.
chasing, a slot with Marvel or DC, which is fine. And
Yeah.
there's nothing, there's great enjoyment and entertainment in working with those products. And, but,
Oh yeah.
you
No,
know,
it's not like I don't chase them. I
yeah,
do chase them.
sure.
Like, like, I send out, I sent out emails today, like, just checking in with, like, some DC editors that I know, just being like, hey, like, just so you know, I'm available if you have anything.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, like, the the difference between when I was starting out was, I think, like, I just sort of, like, in the beginning, it would get, like, really kind of like frustrating to me when I would send those emails out, and not hear back, or be hearing like no, or things like that. Whereas now I just don't really expect
Mm-hmm.
anything from it. It's just sort of like, I'm doing this just to let them know that I'm available, and if they need me, they probably don't need me, but you never know.
It's like
So
clearing out some sort of like, I don't know, like overflow valve, like just in
yeah,
case there's a bit of a flood, you don't want the basement, flooding up. And if you don't, clean this thing out every so often, and the flood happens, you're going to have a basement full of, mess. And
yeah,
this is the way to like, you have to do these certain things if you want to do that thing. Like there's no way
yeah,
around it.
yeah.
Or you can just create your own stuff and have a great life in that way. And it doesn't matter. So
Hmm.
what horror books you're working on this year? I'm just joking. It's like you've sort of like moved yourself into the horror ranks, of creators, which is there's a very intense fan base for those types of books.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny because I don't really have any neat horror books like coming out in the near term.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the stuff I'm working on right now is mostly science fiction and fantasy, but I do have a book coming out on May 15th called Heart Piercer.
Okay.
That's it's fantasy, but it's very kind of like, uh, I would call it like a like dark and gothic fantasy, like a lot more like uh of like a Van Helsing kind of like thing more
Mm-hmm.
than like a Lord of the Rings type of thing. Um, Basically, it's takes place in a world that's been overrun by like your kind of like classic creatures of the night, like werewolves and vampires, and but also like other mythical creatures like giant spiders and dragons and stuff. But it's about a this huntress who basically before the world fell thought she was protecting it by slaying all these like mythical
Hmm.
creatures, things like unicorns and all these like totemic creatures, and she thought she was sort of told that she was like protecting humanity from it, but found out that when the job was done, what she was really doing was basically she killed all of the things that were holding all of these worst things back,
Mm-hmm.
and they kind of come swarming, taking over the world. And so that's got like some horror tinged elements to it, but it's definitely like more of like a fantasy story.
Cool.
But yeah, so that's cool. I've got a book called The Phone Call Away coming out in August. That's more of like a true crime style book. Like it's not a true crime, but it's definitely that like a crime genre,
Mm-hmm.
without any kind of like supernatural elements to it, which is pretty new for me too.
That's cool.
But I did enjoy writing it a lot, and yeah, then I have a on May 1st. I got tapped to write the Mecha Godzilla 50th anniversary special. So if you're a Godzilla
Wow.
fan, um, it's a fun book. It's like a 40-page like special.
That's really cool.
Yeah, and then I have a few other things coming out like towards the end of the year that haven't been announced that I'm not allowed to talk about yet,
All
but
right.
uh, they should be fun.
That's cool. Are you doing any conventions this year?
Yeah, I'll definitely be doing New York Comic Con because that's local to
Yeah.
me, and I'll probably be doing San Diego as well
Okay.
in the summer. Yeah, I was gonna try to make it out to Chicago this year, but I wasn't able to line things up.
Yeah.
But
They're
yeah,
they're a huge investment of time and energy.
yeah, they are. Yeah, there are a couple of like local ones in Jersey that I do, um, but yeah, nothing like huge.
Yeah.
But
Right on. Well, Rich, thank you. It's great talking to you.
yeah, it's great talking to
You
you too.
were what I call the first of a new breed of guests where a fan says on social media, "Hey,
Uh
interview this person," and that you were the first person. And I was like, my gosh, that person broke the system. They figured it out. Like, okay.
Right,
So like, I can't be like a complete jerk and be like, no. So I was like, all
right,
right, well,
right.
that works, so A plus to who, I've forgotten the person's name, but I will find their message and I will let them know it's coming out. But,
Yeah,
thank you for sharing your time.
yeah. Thank you for having me. Had a great time.